Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Okay, well, we are back with Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. Mick Mulroy and Adam here. Mick, thanks for coming back again. Today we were going to jump right into it and talk about the concept of justice, which definitely seems to be an apt discussion topic right now. Not only for, I think, the concepts of legal justice and criminal justice, but also the concepts of justice in the sense of wider treatment of others. So,
Yes.
And I think this is one of those times where I think the applied part of our show title, I think, will really hopefully start to shine through, because it's easy for anyone to start quoting statements by Epictetus or Seneca or Marcus Aurelius with this concept. They're obviously good quotes, or great quotes even, but I think this is the kind of thing where applying, I almost feel like this is one of the most applied parts of the practice is that concept of justice, and the wider, in both the personal accountability sense, the wider sense as well, though, because it's all about actions, and that's how those kind of come together. So, but what do you think, Mick? What's your lead in you'd like to start us with today?
Well, first of all, I'll say I love quotes, but for whatever reason, I can't ever remember them exactly, right? So I see all these quotes, and then I'm always writing them down, and then I've got to refer to them. So, and greetings from Washington, D.C. I think where justice is obviously something that is discussed quite a bit, and I think a lot of people think justice. They really just think the legal process. They think due process, um, and equality, which is certainly part of it, right? That people should be treated the same, that you shouldn't be treated differently in the legal system, whether you're wealthy or not wealthy, and that everybody should have a knowledge of what's fair and they should be treated fair. And that was like the basis of most democratic justice systems. So no star chambers, no no the state can find you guilty because the state wants to find you guilty. Think Russian criminal courts right now. You have to prove it. You have all sorts of safety and measures for those that are accused: right to counsel, for example, right to not incriminate yourself, right to confront the witnesses against you, right to be, I'm just using the U.S. legal system, but I'm sure Canada is essentially the same. When it comes to these rights for the individual, right to trial by jury, for example, of peers, not a state appointed judge who's simply going to go with whatever the state appointed leader says in many countries. So I think that's a part of what the Stoics talked about when it came to justice, but just one part. I was brought up to say that justice also includes, and you already referenced it, Adam, how you treat others, right? And it's not necessarily tied to how you're treated. You are responsible for how you act to others. Even in the case, and of course Aurelius wrote himself about this all the time, if they are, boorish, rude, or you are responsible for how you act to others with respect and dignity. And it reflects as much on you as it would on them. So I think that's another key component we should explore. And then the other part that at least I was always taught in justice is essentially compassion and empathy, which equals service, right? And compassion isn't a word that's always associated with, us Stoics, although I think it should be. It's just because of the image of being, very, very rigid and non-emotional. But compassion, I think, is actually clearly, in my estimation, part of being a Stoic, or as you, if you will, following Stoicism, with keeping in mind that some people prefer the latter to say what they're doing. I think compassion is that you should generally care about others, right? I think it was Seneca that said, if you want to be loved, love, in the sense that you owe the world something, and oftentimes that's the best way for the world to pay you back, if you're looking at it that way. And empathy, which means you can put yourself in their position, even if you're not in their position. And I think if you take those two together, it requires service to the community. So those are my initial thoughts. I'd love to hear yours on each one of them, and then we can
Yeah, I
break it
mean,
down.
not to be too agreeable, but
Oh,
but definitely, that the concepts you're talking about there will always resonate with me on this topic because especially from the compassion perspective, right? I mean, I had an interesting exchange with someone recently where they talked about Stoicism and how it always seems like everyone who says they're a Stoic is very individualistic and very all about themselves and almost like I'll do whatever's right for me and then no one else will matter. When in reality, I think compassion is so deeply rooted within Stoicism and within the practice that you can't really be a Stoic if you're not practicing it, right? When it comes to the concept of justice, Donald Robertson, in his book Stoicism and the Art of Happiness, defines it using words like benevolence, magnanimity, equality of action, not of action, but of quality of interaction with people, right? And I think it's just such an important part of it, right? Compassion and empathy go hand in hand, where you try to feel or understand or take in the values or the emotions or the experience of the others, and you try to think about that, right? You're having compassion for others, you're thinking about what they're going through, right? Now I think a Stoic would always say something like, you cannot allow that, like if someone is sad, you need to make sure that you're not losing yourself to that same emotion, but at the same time you can still have compassion for them, you can still try to find a middle ground with that person, if you have to say it that way. And I think it's important because it sort of resonates as a thread that's kind of thinly veiled throughout a lot of the writings and a lot of the practices that we talk about. And then in modern day Stoicism, which I think is trying to peel away some of this sort of broic or dollar sign s Stoicism practices that are out there. They're basically trying to say, people come to them and say, I'm looking for something. I'm trying to be a good person and treat others fairly. And, I don't really like all this other stuff. And then someone like Donald has said to me that when they are in those conversations, they say, well, that's Stoicism, right? And they kind of go,
mhm.
oh, I thought it was about people working out and taking ice baths. And it's like, well,
What?
not really. Not really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
being real specific. I
yeah,
mean, Musonius Rufus talked about like testing yourself
yes.
and really pushing it, right? So if they just
Yeah,
pull one part out without
I
the
know.
rest, it's not. It's like you said, it's dollar sign stoicism. Probably
Yeah,
they're just trying to use something that people are interested in
yeah.
to push a very specific thing. And not that there's anything wrong with ice baths,
No,
uh,
but
but but that's not what's. I mean, it's a component, but without the whole, it's not. You're not practicing stoicism. You're just
yeah, you're
an
not.
ice bath.
You're
Yeah.
not. And so, what I get sometimes with people is they're sort of like, well, what should I read? And you kind of go, well, it doesn't matter what you read on it. I mean, obviously, read someone who knows what they're talking about, but make sure you read all of it, is something I had said, because the spectrum to this, like the spectrum of the four virtues, right, it covers, I think, basically everything. But the spectrum within justice itself is one that's it's a little bit deeper, I find. Like wisdom is a good thing, right? It's like learn from your mistakes, learn from that experience, go ahead and use that in the future, right? That's that wisdom. I always think of wisdom as like experience plus knowledge, applied, right? But justice is one that I think it has a much deeper kind of core value to it, which is the outward compassion or the outward empathy towards others. And
Yes.
but then people struggle with that today, especially because and not getting into specifics, but today we are experiencing some very very challenging times on different fronts, whether it comes to equality for certain members of society, or war or famine, or injustices like criminal injustices, right, going on unchecked or unpunished or whichever.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people really struggle with what to do with that. I mean, I know I have. Like, there's an interesting thread with any of these kind of podcasts, which is someone will always ask you, like, well, what do I do? And that's a really interesting topic, especially when it comes to justice, because, you know, there's a concept in Stoicism, which is actually Socratic. It started with Socrates, where he says, no one chooses to do wrong. No one chooses to do wrong willingly. And it's not that people don't make mistakes. It's that when someone does something, they think it's the right thing to do. So if we'll use a metaphor. I'll use ice hockey because I'm Canadian, although I really don't watch ice hockey at all. I actually don't really watch North American sports, but in ice hockey, so Wayne Gretzky was an amazing ice hockey player, and he would pass the puck. And sometimes it wouldn't, like at the start, especially of his career, sometimes he would pass it and it looked like it wasn't going to anybody, and he wasn't making a mistake. He was trying to pass it to where the person was going to be, right? So the thing is he's not trying to screw that up. He thinks that's the right place to put the puck, just somebody else isn't there. And, you know, I sports metaphors sound kind of bro, but at the same time,
Ah,
I think it's
nothing
the
wrong with
same thing.
sports.
Yeah,
There's
exactly. But
a lot
I
of
think it's
connection to stoicism in
there
sports.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I know there's a a lot of work done with persons like Ryan Holiday about that. But I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? Is like going into it thinking like you know having compassion for others and understanding that they're not out there to get you. They're not out there to screw this up in a way. There, no one. I think I've said this on the podcast before. Like, there's no evil man in the corner twirling his mustache and thinking, "I'm going to ruin all of this." That's not what they're doing. In many cases, think it's the right thing to do. They can be wholly incorrect. That's absolutely true. But you know, when you walk in with that magnanimity to say they're trying their best, they're at least trying to do what they think is right. That doesn't mean it's not wrong. That it could be very wrong, and there are wrong
Mhm.
things happening. But when you go in thinking like everyone's trying to just do what they think is the right thing, it helps. And that's my first tip for today when it comes to that is like just trying to, because most people that will listen to this and go through this, they probably don't work and, well, actually, I shouldn't say that, but my assumption would be that many people who listen to this kind of thing wouldn't be people who are in split second decisions all day long that are life and death, right? You're dealing with tough people in the office, or you're dealing with the guy who cut you off on the highway, or you're dealing with, you know, maybe something worse than that, though. But I always try to remember that because compassion is so deeply tied into it. Of just like Socrates would argue you to death, but he would say, "I want you to be able to express your opinion, and I think it's okay. I'm telling you that you're wrong, right?" So
Yeah. Yeah. So the first one of the points you made, Adam, I think is very key to expand on, and that's the idea that Stoicism is self-centered, which I think is in many ways the opposite because their self-centeredness, if you will, is about criticism. Like you're supposed to be harder on yourself than you are on others. So yeah, there's a self in reflection part of it, but it is to be a better person, which of course benefits everybody else, right? So instead of walking around criticizing what everybody else is doing, Stoicism asks you to focus on what you are doing or not doing, uh, you know, and not do the other, and literally not be the guy or gal that walks around, pointing out the flaws in other people, talking about them behind their back, which I think is completely non-stoic, spreading rumors, right? The three sieves of Socrates talked about, if it's, he went down the list of, you know, do I need to know? Is it good? Is it valuable and something that would change? And if the answer is
yeah,
no, don't say it, right? But
yeah,
it's very self-critical. Like, don't complain even to yourself. As somebody who's served in the military, that's a hard one to do because like it's the only thing you got to do that you could control is like complaining, right? So it's like the lance corporal's God-given right is to complain. But in Stoicism,
yeah,
the idea is no, 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 no. And then there's also you're responsible for your actions, right? You referenced the um, the conflicts that are going on in the world, and to be frank, as somebody who my full time job is working with a bunch of veterans to help humanitarian efforts, so I'm involved in all the conflicts, just about all of them. Most people are starving in these conflicts because of the conflict, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not talking droughts, they occur, of course. We're not talking natural disasters. We're talking man-made disaster, which is now creating man-made famine.
Yeah.
And that's important to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think if you take Gaza, for example, and we're not a political show, and I don't even talk politics, but um, everybody's responsible for their own actions.
Yeah.
So the horrific events of October 7th should never have happened, and everybody that was involved should be held accountable. And I'm pretty harsh on my accountability, uh, but kids shouldn't starve to death either. It shouldn't even be a debate. Like every human adult should know that in their core. They shouldn't have to be, that shouldn't have to be something you convince them of. It's simply unacceptable. And I would only say, as this relates to Stoicism, you ultimately have to be responsible for your actions. You cannot
Yeah.
become your enemy, not to keep going through a bunch of quotes, but there's so many quotes that come out of Stoicism that
Yeah.
reflect on this, right? The best thing you can do is not to become like your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are morally as corrupt as they are,
Yeah.
literally, because you're being like them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a poignant thing when it comes to the worst extremes that's going on in the world. It's obviously not just in Gaza. There's conflicts in Ukraine. There's conflicts in Sudan, particularly in Sudan. There's humanitarian crisis is even worse in Gaza, which is hard to believe, and it's all because people are
Yeah.
fighting, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very real world extreme example. But ultimately, if the world was full of the practitioners of Stoicism,
Yeah.
it would be hard to be one and allow the other to happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's, in fact, not hard to be impossible. You simply would not be doing,
Yeah.
you not be following. So that is something I think is very, uh, very relevant right now.
Absolutely. And I think let's talk about action because, what I get a lot of times from people, right, is I am a pacifist myself in the sense of I don't believe in violence or weaponized conflict. I just don't. I'm also very lucky to live in a place where that doesn't really happen. But the truth is that a lot of people sort of ask about what can I do, right? Because like let's take it in the most mundane sense of like you're in a boardroom or a meeting and someone's really rude to you in that meeting and belittling or whatever and they're like, so am I just supposed to take it, right? And I think there's an interesting thing that we should talk about here because I don't think you and I would say in any way that the answer is just do nothing, right? It's okay to take what they say and say that's wrong or whatever, right? And I think it's really important to look at it this way because we talk about you're responsible for your own actions, but I think some people feel like they can never do anything. But when we take the quote that you were just talking about, I think it's important to say that, try not to be, the best thing is to not be like that person, not be like that enemy. But the thing is like that leaves you with a huge spectrum of actions you can take in reaction to that. I mean, the first thing obviously is talking about how we do it. Like you have to work on not losing your cool because of something somebody says. I always like to think about Winston Churchill's quote when he heard about people saying rumors about him, and he said something like, "Well, it's too bad they don't know me better because there's way worse things they could be on me about." And I love that one because I'm like, I'm sure I'd be the same thing if people knew me more, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, what are the actions you can take, right? Like it's not a bad thing to say, I think that was very rude, right? In a controlled manner, obviously, but like I don't think that's very rude. I'll use an example from my side. I work with the space program, and we were having some tough conversations in a meeting one time, and someone like literally chastised someone in this meeting. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm using this as an example, but I did take an action to not be like that person and say I think it's disrespectful to make that statement in front of the 20 engineers who are working
Mhm.
this problem right now, right? And it changed the tone of the meeting where
Mhm.
we weren't getting, I use the term lambast along a lot, but we weren't getting lambasted by this person who was just chastising us all like we were
Mhm.
like we were idiots, I'm going to say. And I think it's one of those things where people for in so many ways they feel like they have no they have no action they can take. But this is where I think justice is important. Like benevolence and magnanimity is also not just everybody's happy, there's nothing wrong. That's not what it means. What it means more is like, I understand this person's angry. I'll have compassion towards them for the fact that they are angry about something and saying things that they think are right or true. But I can also take action in that moment to get us back to a place of equality in this meeting and good exchange. I'd be curious of your thoughts on that, but that was a very kind of a famous interaction that happened in this meeting actually. And when I mean famous, I mean within my
Sure.
office space, where someone came up to me afterwards and were like, "Thank you so much for saying that because, you know." If we got something wrong, we'll fix it. But like, it's the worst when you're getting spoken to like you're a toddler, right? And so I think that's it's don't get me wrong. It doesn't apply to everything, no, but I think it's very minor. But just as a quick example, I think that's something where you can make a decision. You can make a decision to act to change the narrative. I think that's a great way to I think maybe say this as well. Those are actions that people can take, and they show justice and magnanimity towards others by doing that. Like we talked recently, we did our podcast recording on the Stoic opposition, and they took action.
Hmm.
They didn't go out there condemning everybody, but they were definitely fighting for others to make sure that people were being treated fairly. And in that way, I think that's partly what we're talking about. But anyways, I'd be curious about your view on that idea of like you can't always do something. It's just how you do it. Maybe is part of the discussion.
Sure. And especially, I mean, you're in engineering and science, but really this applies to every spectrum of society. There, to advance, there's going to be some friction, right? But because people are going to agree, they're going to disagree, and then they're going to find out what's right, and then it's going to advance. That's just how it happens, right? But there's ways to disagree without being disagreeable, and that's really going back to reflecting on yourself and holding others accountable, especially if you're in a position where you're like you are, where you're the lead, where your job not only is to lead a team, but it's to protect the team. It just is. That's the way I look at it as a leader, right? So if somebody's coming at your people unfairly or
Absolutely.
disrespectfully, you have a obligation, like you said, and your demeanor is such that I'm sure it was. You are respectful, and you're pointing out that they're disrespectful, right? But you have an obligation to do that. You're not going to be a shrinking violet. That's certainly not Stoicism.
Right.
It's opposite. If you have an obligation to stand up when other people won't.
Hmm.
And I heard reading a story about Einstein. So it's more in the realm of academia, but he had, obviously he was already hugely well esteemed. People essentially thought he was, the oracle, right?
Yeah.
Whatever he said was the law. Like literally, it just became law. You might just write it down, not question it. And he was in a room with a bunch of other very qualified scientists, and one of the parts of his equation, at the end, he asked if anybody had any questions, and this young female student, which was rare at the time, stood up, very deferential, very nervous, and pointed out that part of his equation was incorrect. And like literally, the whole room was aghast, like somebody get her out of here.
Right.
And Einstein turned around and looked at the equation, and then simply turned around and, I'm paraphrasing or condensing it, but said, "I want to thank you so much for having, the fortitude to get up and correct me, because that would have likely stayed incorrect." Right. So it isn't disagreeing that is the problem. It's being rude in that disagreement that is completely unnecessary, and then turns the whole process into a personal thing for a lot of people, that becomes then about winning when the whole
Oh yeah.
point is progressing. Like I'm going to believe what I'm going to, and this is on social media all the time,
Yeah.
right? I'm just going to agree with what I'm never going to change my mind, right? I'm just going
Yeah.
to keep throwing out unfounded, facts. And so I think
Yeah.
there's a point to when it comes to getting along with society, being part of a society. Like what's good for the bee is good for the beehive, kind of thing, or
Yep.
the opposite. What's good for the beehive is good for the bee.
Hmm.
Is being able not only just to be polite to people, which is I mean, I'm speaking to a Canadian. You guys are famous for it, and you should be proud. You should be proud of it. I mean, honest, I know people make
Yeah.
jokes about it, but it isn't just being polite. It's also being able to be in a disagreement or a debate
Yeah.
and actually advance the whole thing, the
Yeah.
whole process, the whole advancement of society, if you will, or whatever you're talking about specifically, without coming off the rails and turning into a war of words, or even worse, a war of physical violence.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think so much today feels adversarial and very polarizing, and it's that is striking me more than anything now because at some point, if you're in an office, you're all trying to get to something, a product, a solution, whatever it is. But if you're in the most base human states, right? Looking for food, looking for whichever, like you're all trying to get the same thing and you're all trying to get a positive outcome to that. I just don't know that it helps if you make it suck even more. You know what I mean? Like I had a conversation with someone one time that I had been struggling with a little bit. We were crossing wires. That's what a lot of times you say in the engineering. You're like, oh, I think we crossed wires on that one. You're like, oh, okay. And we had crossed wires recently on something, not recently, but like when the conversation happened, we had crosswired recently on it, and I finally just turned to them and said, "Look, we're going to be on this program for 3, 5, whatever it was years. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
just can't suck. Like, we
Yeah,
we we
yeah,
don't need it to suck, right? And that's the thing, right? Like, life's hard enough as it is.
yep,
I think it might be Philo of Alexandria again to be a quotey guy, but who said something like, everyone is battling something, so you don't have to make it worse
yep,
or something like that. And I just
yeah.
remember thinking,
Robin
that
Williams said something similar to that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
he did, and I think that's something that resonates within this concept so much because this magnanimity or compassion towards others takes into account the fact that we are all human beings and that we all have tough stuff we have happen and make mistakes, and then we end up in a spot where um you know we can take an action. The action is not like it's not like an action movie where you're like, I'm going to be compassionate, then you jump in your car and speed off. That doesn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it
Right.
comes to this, but it's funny because it's almost so small. These little triggers that you can do to yourself that can make a huge impact later on, right? No one usually remembers at the end of the day the arguments or the reports, or might remember very specific things. Like I know in your job you must have many moments that are definitely not forgettable, right? But and I have the same in my own way. But ultimately, people usually, I think, when it comes to with other interactions with others, it's how they felt, right? It's how they feel, and that's where I think that base action anybody can take is just so much of like change the narrative, change the tone, change the emotion in that moment, and that I think is very important when you can objectively step away and say to this, like, this is a human being. They're obviously trying to do something they think is right, or this is a human being, they deserve my justice in some way. If you can get to that place, I think that's a big step forward for many of us. It gets away from the adversarial nature. It gets away from all of this other stuff. Because I was never raised with the idea that there were different races. Like I always understood the concept that there was the human race and then we had different ethnicities within it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can get to that base idea of just like they're all human beings, right? Treat them as such. I just think it makes it better. But it's
Yeah.
tough. It's tough. I'm not saying it's easy. I don't know that you are either.
No, I'm not. I would say on that last point you made, uh, the idea that Dr. King had that everybody should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, is something that everybody should listen to, because there seems to be uh, a shift, if you will, in which the only thing that's important is what race you're in, right? So I'm not saying that I mean, obviously, if you know me for a half an hour, you know my ethnicity. I'm not saying you don't acknowledge it, be proud of it, and all that stuff, obviously. But I'm just saying that if you take that quote and that's where society wants to go, then you can't turn everything to an issue of race, ethnicity, and gender. If you do, then you're not trying to go to, especially on the race issue and ethnicity, going to a colorblind society. You're trying to go to a society that amplifies color, that essentially depicts you as your color, and that wants to characterize and categorize you as your color. So it's something that I think, because you got certainly issues on the far of each side of the political spectrum, but they're ending up in the same place, which is, you are defined by, characteristics which really shouldn't be defined, shouldn't define you. You're not defined as, Adam Pearson just because you're a white person with red hair, right?
Yeah.
You gotta call it like it is, because there's plenty of people who essentially look at you or anybody, whatever color, whatever hair, not to pick on you, buddy. But
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden that's who you are.
Yeah.
And if you want a colorblind society, it should be the opposite.
Yeah. I
You
totally
should
agree.
hear who they are, what they
Yeah.
believe, and that's how you get to what you just said should be the ideal state, which Stoicism said 300 BC.
I know.
Right?
I know. And so people hear, to speak to that last point, for that very last point you said, people hear this and they sort of go, wow, what kind of philosophy is that? And I'm like, well, that's Stoicism. Like
Yep.
that, you know what I mean? Like, let's be real frank, because it was interesting, because there was a book recently that came out, and I think it was titled something like Dead White Men or something. And it was talking about philosophy and, how in reality, like, so Zeno, I believe he was Phoenician, right? So which means that
They don't know, but yes,
they
they
don't
think
know.
he probably was, but
Yeah.
he Greek,
Yeah.
from a
But
Greek
let's put it that way. He's not
idiot.
from Ireland, right?
He is
Mick?
not,
Like, he's not
unfortunately.
from
Unfortunately, we would have claimed the hell out of him, just so
I
you know.
know. I know, but he's not from Ireland, right? He's not from Britain, which is where most
No,
of
no, of
my
course not.
stock is from, right? And I think it's very important to say that, right? Is like,
Yes, he
we
wasn't Greek. They don't think.
it wasn't even Greek exactly,
Yeah.
and Greeks are many times depicted as like blonde haired, blue eyed, and I'm always like, have you been to Greece, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's what we have to remember, right? Is like these intrinsically good values are ones that are coming from a broad spectrum of people, and
Mhm.
in some ways that's how we all have to kind of think about it. So I urge everyone to kind of remember those things. I was lucky enough to see Nelson Mandela speak when he
Yeah.
spoke here at what was called the Sky Dome at the time. Now it's called the Rogers Center, I think, but I don't use that name. But
Mhm.
I was lucky enough to see Nelson Mandela speak, and he spoke about that. It's just that caring, you have to look as everyone. That statement of looking at everyone else like your brother.
Mhm.
It's not like everybody is your family, but definitely of the sense of like we are all human beings, and I think if you can get back to that, I think that helps in so much. But justice is it's so deep. It's one of those fundamentally challenging ones, simply because um, it's the tough one, because it's something that is it's not like courage, where it's like stand up and fight. It's one of those ones
Mhm.
where it's like you have to kind of, it's like a two-step, like introspective thing and then another action. But I think it's the one that almost in some ways to me provides the most value back, because you just
Yeah.
feel it.
Yeah, and it's the one that, I think there's several quotes out there about justice being the most important of the four.
Yeah.
And it's continuous, and it doesn't end.
Yeah.
And then, Mandela is a great example of, I don't know if he considered himself Stoic, but he's certainly used by Stoics for an example.
Yeah. He
27
quotes
years
he
on
quotes Marcus a couple
Robin's
times.
Island.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and read Epictetus and,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Invictus. That's why they made the movie about Mandela was called
Hmm.
Invictus,
Yeah.
right? A very Stoic poem.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, but you got to call it like it is. There's people who have essentially started making, identity politics, I guess is the term people use, as their own. And that's all that does is divide people, and it's getting away from the society that Dr. King said. I would point. I'm going to quote. I'm going to do a quote once again.
It's
If we
fine.
get comments like you guys don't need to go from quote to quote, but I'll try to
Yeah.
steer it down a bit. But this one I think is particularly important. That injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Right. So it's
Yes.
letters from a Birmingham jail. And by the way, I went to law school in Birmingham, and my constitutional law course essentially was like everything took place within a walk from my law school, right? So you could go
Right.
to the Birmingham
Okay.
jail
Wow.
and actually see these. But I think that is a very apt quote for us, because justice also is not just about you or even your society. If you're not willing to stand up for injustice against injustice everywhere, you're not truly grasping the concept. I think
Right.
obviously Dr. King did grasp the concept, but his quote perfectly sums it up. If you are not willing to fight for it where you are, it's not really going to exist anywhere.
Right.
And that is something, and that is why Stoicism will never be a bunch of shrinking violets, never be the people who don't stand up, because if it is, it will never be actualized. You have to be willing to stand up for other people,
Yeah.
not just yourself. You have to be willing to be critical of yourself, not others. I mean, I guess you can still be critical of others, but the point is you should be more critical of yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to put it on the line. Courage isn't just, like you said, charging into battle. That's courage, but it's also not sitting at the back of the bus,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then not
Yeah.
allowing other people to have to sit at the back of the bus.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key reason why this lasts for so long. You mentioned 300 BCE. Our progenitor is from 600, so like let's average that out as 2,400 years, right? It's
Yeah,
or 2,450. I think it resonates and resists against the polarizing, ebb and flow of the time because it's so universal, right? And you know what I would say now then, just because I think we're probably at a good place to wrap up, is because you were mentioning about if people make comments about us going from quote to quote, do tell us, leave a comment or send an email, whatever, like
I'm
because we
still
do
going
want
to do it.
engagement. Yeah, I know we're still going to do it, but we want but we want engagement from
I'll
others,
tone it
right?
down.
So oh, it's all good.
Yeah,
But I think we want engagement from others, and I think it's important to say, especially like the concept of justice is one that has a couple of different underlying themes. So I think we'd
yeah,
love to hear from people as to how they actuate that in their lives, how they feel about it. Do they feel like you and I do, where it's almost one of the most important ones, right? If not the most important one, or do you feel like it has a difference there? I think it would be interesting to hear other people's take on this one for sure, because just this is the other one as well, where it's not as much an internal one. It's also about the treatment of those around you, and I think we'd love to hear about that and our different avenues that we'll have for people to talk to us about that. So, but it's probably a
yes.
good place to wrap up, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, Mick.
No, I think you covered it well, Adam. If people have ideas on this, if people would like to write about
Yeah.
um, the concept of justice, any of those components, as it relates either in general or specifics,
Hmm.
please send it to us.
Yeah.
We want this to be an interactive um, effort and a
Yeah.
combined effort. So it's not just the two guys talking. We aren't, and we don't hold ourselves out as some kind of sages on Stoicism, nor professors of philosophy. We're two guys that are just talking about the philosophy we follow, and
Yeah.
hopefully in a discussion with others that are interested in the same.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, Mick, thanks again for today. I hope if you're listening to this out there, you have felt like you've gotten something from it. But otherwise, we will see you on the next episode, and everybody take care. I'll say this is a good time, I think, to quote Stephen Fry and say, "Everyone, please be absolutely wonderful to each other," and then we can sign off. So, cheers. Thanks, Mick.
Good. Thanks, buddy. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism, send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.